I will start this meeting with the normal remarks that the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan and that we study and educate people on the issues that are before us today. So, we'd like you to have an informed and educated vote when you go to the polls. I'd also like to introduce Barbara Francis in the back of the room, who is our membership chair, and she will be happy to welcome your membership, and we would like to invite the men that are here to also join the League of Women Voters. We have many male members, and we're happy to add to that list as well. We have Catherine Morsink, who is the National Program Chair, which is the national program. This year is Vote for 11. I don't know if you've seen it, the little handout that's on the back table. If you put that on your computer and your zip code, it will give you all the information you need to go that's within the province of your vote. And that's the League of Women Voters program. We also have, this is the last one for this year until after the elections in November. And January we have Health with Henry Logan. February we have Water with Pushpa Kalpa. And March we have Education, Libraries, and in the schools and in our libraries, and the banning of books with Janet Janke. Sorry. Anyway, that's the end of my remarks, and I'd like to introduce Catherine now. Where are you, Catherine? Oh, here. Okay. Thank you.
I hope I don't scream at you. Are you okay? Can you hear me? Well, I'm afraid of that. This microphone that's floating around here makes really weird noises, very loud, so I'll try to avoid that. But the important thing is here now, the cookies have arrived. Even though the microphone isn't working too well, you can console yourself by just have another cookie. We are happy that this is the last program of the year, and hopefully everything will be better next year. The technology will work, and everyone will be smiling, and microphones will magically reappear. At this point, I would like to remind you that tomorrow we have supervised voting here at Okemuk in the Health Pavilion. It's in assisted living, the Country Kitchen. If you signed up for it, you can vote here. If you didn't sign up, then try again next time. But all of you, if you have a completed ballot, may bring it down, go past the grill room entrance into assisted living where the door has the check-in point, and you go all the way down that hall, and the director of mail-in voting and the director of outreach coordination for the county supervisor will be there to take your ballot. So that's available to anyone who lives here, whether you signed up for supervised voting or not. If you have a ballot and you want them to take it back for you rather than sending it in the mail. Well, I'm very happy to announce a special guest tonight. His last name will be familiar to most of you at Okemuk who have lived here a while. And his mother is one of our famous residents. She's hiding in the corner. This is Marilyn Hutchinson. She and her husband moved to Okemuk at the very, very, very beginning, even before I did. And she knows all about the good things that have happened here over the years. I am pleased to say that she brought up a good son, and I'd like to have the pleasure of letting you listen to his remarks of wisdom on the local ballot. Robert Hutchinson grew up in the eastern part of Alachua County, where he lives with his wife, Meg Niederhofer. She was the city's, Alachua's first arborist, and she served in that position for 23 years. Hutch has an undergraduate degree from Emory and years of graduate work at the University of Florida in architecture, planning, engineering. He's worked for GRU in public information, served as the Gainesville Downtown Redeveloper Director and Director of Development for the Florida Museum of Natural History. He was also the Executive Director of the Alachua Conservation Trust. He was elected for 3 terms to the Alachua County Commission, where he led the efforts in land conservation, mental health, social justice, drug policy, homelessness, and animal welfare. He served on the boards of the Chamber of Commerce, Community Foundation of North Florida, Florida Community Design Center, Humane Society, Friends of Paynes Perry. It goes on, but the last and the best one is the Wagmore Foundation. That undoubtedly has something to do with your dog. Yeah. It was my pleasure to introduce to you Robert Hutchinson.
Well, thank you very much. This seems like old homecoming, including the bad audio system. I've heard this before. About 10 years ago, right about now, my dad was rehearsing a bunch of folks for a Christmas Carol production, and I remember those times very well. And Okemuk's been so good to my parents and to the community, and I truly appreciate everything you do. I also appreciate the League of Women Voters. I've been involved one way or another with campaigns for almost 40 years, and the League always puts on the best forums and really is the trusted source of information. So I particularly remember the campaign finance reform work that we were doing, that the League was instrumental in helping support that. So I'm going to talk about 2 referendums that are on your ballot. They're right towards the end. Depending upon the form of your ballot, they'll be either the last 2 or among the last 2. The first one is about single-member districts, and some of you may have received a mailer today about it, but single-member districts, to sort of understand them, you have to know what counties do and what commissioners do. Back in the day, when Florida was first formed, all the counties were the same. They had 5-member elected boards. The commissioners were elected at large by everybody, but they each had to live in a separate district. So those are called at-large voting, but residential districts. And the thinking back then was that we all wanted to vote for the commissioners who raise our taxes and do all the other things they do, but we wanted them to live far enough apart where everybody got to look at all the roads, because roads were a big deal in developing counties. And so that's kind of the genesis, we think, of where the notion came from. The other thing to know about counties is that county commissioners get a commission. We get a commission from the state government. When I first got elected, I opened my mail one day and there's a big fancy document, and it's got gold and ribbons and lots of signatures on it. And it was a commission commissioning me as a state official, because counties are actually subdivisions of the state. And it's important to know that, because people think that counties and cities are the same. Cities are actually municipal corporations, and as a corporation, they decide what they're going to do and what they're not going to do, and that's how they work. Whereas a county has to do what the state says we have to do, and we can't do those things that the state says is none of our business. So when the state legislature says you're going to put this on the ballot and have it voted on, the county commission just says, yes, we will, because there's nothing else we can do about it. So what a single-member district is where the person you're voting on lives in the same geographic area that you live in, and that's the only one of those elected officials you vote for. So right now, on any given election, you can vote for 2 or 3, there's 5 altogether in Alachua County, candidates for the county commission. Under a single-member districting situation, you would only be able to vote for in one race, and people in other parts of the county would vote for their races. So it's not an uncommon way to do elected bodies. In Florida, there's 42 counties out of our 67 that are the way Alachua County is now, with at-large residential districts, the original form. There's 18 or 19 that are some form of single-member districts, and then there's about 6, I think, that are hybrid, meaning they have some at-large and some single-member. Of the 8 counties that touch Alachua County, 5 of them are at-large residential, just like Alachua County, and 3 of them have single-member districts. So there's 4 ways that you can get a ballot referendum on single-member districts in front of, by the way, that's not me making that sound, that's whoever's walking, it's the ghost in the machine who's doing it. So the first way is that the county commission can put a measure on the ballot. The second way is that every 10 years there's a charter review commission. They can put a measure like this on the ballot. The third way is that citizens can get together, collect enough signatures, and put it on the ballot themselves directly. And then the fourth way is that the state legislature can say, we want this on the ballot, and that's what happened in this case. And so one of the gripes you'll hear about it from some folks is that the legislature is bypassing all those other 3 processes where this has been discussed ad infinitum. The county commission, it would come to us every couple of years for decades. The Charter Review Commission, same thing. Every Charter Review Commission considers it, and they've all rejected it for whatever reasons they decided to reject it. And then the group that would like to see it has attempted to collect signatures, but they can never muster enough signatures to get it on, which kind of tells you that it's not something that a lot of people feel deeply passionate about. But the few who are passionate about it really want this to happen. So they prevailed on Representative Clemens to run a local bill, which means it just affects Alachua County. And a few months ago, it passed, the governor signed it, and so that's what you're looking at on the ballot. Now, what's interesting about single-member districts is the legislature long ago only allowed specific language to be on the ballot. And the language says, the title says, amending the county charter to provide for county commissioner elections in single-member districts. And then the entire language of the question is, shall the 5 members of the Board of County Commissioners of Alachua County be elected to office from single-member districts by electors residing in each of those districts only? Now, what's interesting about that is a number of years ago, we said, we will run this. The county commission did that I was on. We will run this, but we're going to ask the question, would you rather vote for 1 or all 5 of the commissioners that can raise your taxes, regulate your land, protect the environment, provide for public safety, and so forth? And of course, our attorney said no, because the legislature has preempted all other language except the language that you see on your ballot. And the problem I have with that is when people say, well, what's wrong with single-member districts? And I say, nothing, if you only want to vote for one of those scoundrels that can do all those things. But if you want to be able to vote for or against all 5, then you don't want single-member districts. So that's basically the crux of the question. And I'll go over the pros for voting for it, and then the cons for voting for it. And then I'll tell you kind of a middle-of-the-road opinion that I have on the situation. So the pros think that single-member districts are, the people elected to it will be more accountable to the folks in their district. Another pro is that campaigns would be smaller. You're only approaching 1/5 of the number of households and potential voters. So theoretically, you could run a cheaper campaign than you can now, countywide. And the real reason that they want it is that depending upon how the gerrymandering works out, they're more likely to elect some members who represent political views that right now don't necessarily represent the majority of people that are voting in Alachua County. The cons for the reasons to vote against it and to keep the at-large system is that some people think it's better to have all the commissioners at large so that they all have to understand the issues countywide. We all travel everywhere. We have to go to urban and rural areas to understand what the problems are. The commissioners in an at-large system really don't engage in what I would call ward politics. And ward politics, which I've seen in action, is where this commissioner says, well, I want to do this, and the other commissioners say, well, what are you going to do for me? And so there's a lot of back scratching because you can't get anything done without those other votes, but those other commissioners don't represent the same interests you do. So ward politics, depending upon your perspective, can be good or bad. I think it's bad, and so do the people who are against this. The other thing is that single-member districts are often put in place where there's a need or an attempt to get more racial minority representation elected, to get maybe more women on commission and so forth. But for over 50 years now, Alachua County has had a larger than proportional share of African Americans on our board. We've had women majority boards on multiple occasions, including right now. And so the need for single-member districts has not been demonstrated in Alachua County on the basis of those purposes that it's often brought forward for. And then finally, gerrymandering becomes ferocious political sport when you have single-member districts, which right now we don't even worry about. You don't hear about gerrymandering for county commission elections because we're all elected at large. So those are the sort of reasons against it. The city of Gainesville, by comparison, they've got a hybrid system. They've got 4 commissioners that are elected in single-member districts, and then 3, one of whom is the mayor, who are elected at large. And the beauty of their system is that each person, no matter where you live, votes for 4 out of the 7 elected officials, because you've got your district commissioner, 2 at-large commissioners, plus the mayor. So in terms of the amount of representation you get, it's actually pretty good. And finally, I'll just sort of end with what would the districts look like, or what do the districts look like? Right now, the districts for county commissioners where they have to live look like almost perfect slices of pie radiating out from the middle of Gainesville. And there's a reason why they're shaped that way. It's not just because the commissioners like pie. It's because the center of Gainesville, particularly around the University of Florida, is very dense in population. And almost the only way to balance out the requirements of the law, which is equal population sizes and contiguous, is to draw those pie-shaped slices. And it would take me probably half an hour to explain on a map, but basically you have to use the populations in census tracts. Census tracts in the rural areas are huge. I'm talking 100 square miles. A census tract in Gainesville will be a block or 2 or even 1 or 2 apartment complexes. And so by the time you combine enough of those to go with those very large geographic small population districts, you end up inevitably with pie slices. The last time I dealt with this problem personally was in 2001, and we generated with computers every single possible combination of districts that met the criteria. There were 23 of them. Every single one of them were pie slices. So the irony is that the district that I served in started at basically University and 13th, and then went very narrowly out Newberry Road, and past Hale Plantation, town of Tioga, and then expanded out to be Newberry and Archer. And that was the smallest geographic district, but it had an equal population. And the irony is the people that are mostly supporting this mostly live in Newberry and High Springs, that western side of the county. And they could end up being in a district that is largely college students. And whatever the political implications of that are, I think they would find very amusing. So I could go on and on about single-member districts, but what I'm going to do right now is take a few questions on this before we move on to wild spaces, public places. So anybody have questions about single-member districts? Yes?
Okay.
So Chuck, the question was Chuck Clemens' reaction, and that was motivation. Well, he stated in the paper just a couple days ago that he personally didn't care one way or another, but he just wanted to give the people a vote on it. And I don't know if that's true or not. What is going on in western Alachua County, it's a movement called Springs County. A group of folks want to secede from Alachua County because they don't like the liberal politics in Alachua County. And it's the Spring County folks that are now primarily working on this single-member district effort as another way to sort of create their politically conservative district and give it some voice. Yes. Yeah, I will. Okay, so the question is, one way to put this on the ballot is to collect enough signatures, and I don't know the exact number, but it's 10,000 or so, or maybe more like 15,000 now. And they could do that. They have tried to do that. They've never been able to get the signatures, and I know of at least 2 efforts to collect the signatures, and in both cases they failed. And so the heart of the question is, why should the signature process be bypassed by a legislator? And that's a question. And if you agree that they should put in the work to get the signatures to put it on the ballot, then you should vote no on this. But if you think that this is a good way to put it on the ballot, then vote yes. Yes, sir. It becomes part of the Alachua County Constitution, which we call the charter. It doesn't end until somebody, yeah, okay. The question is, if this thing passes this November, does it ever sunset and go away? And the answer to that is it stays in the charter until the charter is amended again, which could be amended by the voters, could be amended by the county commission putting it back on. This could become a perennial fight to see who can get things changed back and forth. So changing a form of government should be taken very carefully. Nope. Well, the legislature has made it much tougher to collect signatures. You can't use paid signature gatherers except under certain conditions, and there's just a lot of restrictions. So the legislatures, on the one hand, made it a lot tougher to get signatures. And so maybe this is their sort of make-up call. Since we made it so hard on you, we're just going to put it on the ballot without signatures. All right, I'll talk about the Wild Spaces Public Places, which is the second referendum on your ballot. And for those of you who want to check it out, there's a really good section of frequently asked questions about it on the website, wildspacespublicplaces.org. Very easy to remember. And Wild Spaces Public Places has a long and venerable history in Alachua County. In 2000, the voters decided that they wanted to start conserving land, and they voted in Alachua County forever. And then about a decade later, they voted in Wild Spaces Public Places #1. A few years later, they voted Wild Spaces Public Places #2. And this will be Wild Spaces Public Places #3 on your ballot. And what it does is it generates funds to pay for parks improvements and land conservation. The land that was purchased right next to Oak Hammock a few years ago was purchased with Wild Spaces Public Places money as well as some state matching money. And that's one of the benefits of having a local source of funds, is that you generate state and federal sources that can match and actually get more done. So this version of Wild Spaces Public Places, however, is different. It's got some other things added to it. So it's not just parks and land conservation. It includes road maintenance, not new roads, but maintaining what we've got. It includes public facilities such as fire stations, and it includes affordable housing. Now I'll start from the back. The affordable housing part, because this is what's called an infrastructure tax, it can only be used to buy land or improvements on land like old hotels or something like that to help with affordable housing. It cannot be used for things like down payment assistance or rent subsidies or anything like that. But there are other programs for those things. The public facilities, like fire stations, allows just for the construction of those public facilities. And each city has a little list of the kind of public infrastructure they need. In some cases, it may be sewer systems or fire hydrants or street lights, but it's physical things that government will build. And then the road maintenance, the way that works is the county is generating a list that's based on the usual criteria, like how busy is the road, how deteriorated is the road, how important is the road in terms of the connection. And based on that list, they'll start at the top and start working their way down and try to get a hold of the road conditions that are really pretty deplorable in Alachua County. Of the 67 Florida counties, 66 of them have some form of infrastructure surtax. And most of them use it for road maintenance. In Alachua County, we use it for parks and land conservation. What this will do is it will add roads and those other things I mentioned into the mix. Our tax will go from a half penny, which it is right now, a half penny sales surtax, up to 1 full penny, and it'll last for 10 years. Now, a lot of people think about sales tax, particularly if you're from other states, as regressive. It's bad for poor people. But in Florida, there's an interesting set of exemptions from the sales tax. It's not charged on residential rent. It's not charged on utility bills. It's not charged on groceries. It's not charged on pharmaceutical or medical supplies. It's not charged for a number of other things that poor people spend a lot of their money on. And there's a number of tax holidays for clothing, for emergency supplies, even for recreational gear, that if you pay attention, you can get that extra 6 or 7 cent reduction by shopping during those sales tax holidays. So for better or worse, Florida's sales tax is actually not that regressive compared to the way it is in most other places. And in Florida, we have no income tax, we have no value-added tax, we have no tax on services or professional fees, or there's a lot of things that are taxed in other states that we aren't taxed on. So the sales tax, because we have so many tourists and they like to shop, is actually a pretty good way to raise money. As a matter of fact, in Alachua County, over 30% of the sales tax proceeds to the county government come from people that don't live in Alachua County. So they're using our infrastructure, they've come here, they're using our roads and so forth, so why not have them pay a little bit? What's even more interesting is because a big chunk of it is business-to-business transactions, it turns out that only 24% of the sales tax proceeds actually come from families buying what families buy. The rest of it comes from these other sources, either outside the county or business-to-business transactions. So in the big scheme of things, the sales tax and the sales surtax is a good way to pay for infrastructure. So the way the money gets divided is the county gets 57%. This is based on a state formula. And each of the cities gets a chunk of it based on their population. So the city of Gainesville gets 20-something, 23%, I think. And each of the other small cities gets 8, 7, 2, 1, 0.5%, that sort of thing. And each one of those cities will spend it on what they want, provided half of it goes to parks and land, and the other half goes to those other purposes. So it gives a lot of control back to the local governments, including the cities. The county has an incentive program where they will match funds. The state will match funds for roads, for parks, and so forth. So what we've discovered in the past iterations of this is, in the case of the first Alachua County Forever, for every dollar spent, $2 came in from the state or the feds. So it's a way to attract money into the county to do things that we mostly all agree with. Yeah, go ahead. So the question is, how will the affordable housing component of this work, and particularly for people that are already in subsidized housing? And the short answer to that is, we have a huge supply problem of just not enough units of affordable housing. And supply problem, we just don't have enough. I mean, one estimate I've heard is that if we built 8,000 just for the very lowest income levels, they would be absorbed tomorrow, just in Alachua County. These are all people that are paying way more than they can afford to pay. 50, 75% of their income is going towards their housing, and rents just keep going up. So the purpose of this is to go out and purchase affordable housing and keep it affordable through a land trust or some other form, or to build affordable housing. And each one of the county and the cities will deal with it differently. The county a couple of years ago set up an affordable housing trust fund. This is what will fund that trust fund. And then they will be able to use that to attract other developments and that sort of thing. Now, there's also some regulatory approaches where they can tell developers, you have to build 10% affordable housing in your subdivision. The state very unhelpfully said, if you do that, local government, you have to pay what it costs for the developer to provide that. So this would be a source of money for that as well. So the developer would build something, it would be affordable, he'd send a bill to the county for whatever their perceived lost profit is, and there's at least a way to get some affordable housing. Got one over here and then here. Yeah, there's two, well, the question is about oversight and accountability. And the ballot language speaks directly to that. There is an oversight committee, and that's citizens, and there's certain slots, like there's got to be an accountant, there has to be a lawyer, there has to be different kinds of folks on this board. And they meet a lot, and they're open public meetings, and they look at the expenditures of each city or county, and then they look at the ballot language and the expenditure and the state law, and they say, sorry, that doesn't meet the standard. And I'll give you one example. The city of Gainesville paved the parking lot at the Thomas Center with some previous Wild Spaces Public Places money. And the committee said, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you paving that with park money? They said, well, this is where people park when they're going in to sign up their kids for soccer and swimming lessons and that sort of thing. And they said, we don't like this. It may actually maybe meet the letter of the law, but certainly not the spirit of it. And so the city reversed the charges and paid it out of a different fund. So they're looking out for fairly subtle things that could happen with this money to keep it true to its nature. Now the audits, the independent audit, for any of the auditors in here, you've probably heard of a single-purpose audit, and that's where a program that gets grant money, a lot of times the feds do it or the state, they look at the auditor looks at every transaction to make sure that it meets the law. And the county every year does an extensive audit from an independent auditor that's overseen by the finance director and the clerk of the court, who are separate from the county commission. So they then come to us and tell the county commission, I say us, them, they tell the county commission that everything's good or here's some stuff that doesn't look good. And so the auditors will catch anything that oversight board does. The oversight board is trying to head things off at the pass. If some city's starting to spend money in the wrong direction, then that oversight board says, whoa. As a matter of fact, they've gotten into sort of pre-approving projects now. It used to be they sort of looked at them when they were done, and they realized they needed to get involved much earlier. So now there's a give and take with the cities to make sure that they're not starting to approve things that are going to be problematic. And yes. Yeah, so the question is, what is affordable housing? And the standard is that a person should spend no more than 1/3 of their income on their direct housing related expenses. So y'all are doing the math problem in your head now. Can you afford Okamic anymore? But especially after today. But anyway, so it depends upon your income level. And so what they do is they divide people into different kind of groups. The very low income, and that's somebody who's maybe surviving on an $800 disability check. So they can afford, well, let's say it's $750 to make the math easy. So they can afford $250 a month rent. Well, there's no place that rents for $250 anymore. So they end up with getting subsidized by Section 8 or one of the other programs to pay some of their rent. And then there's the not very low, but the low. And that's somebody who may be making $1,500 or $2,500 a month, maybe Social Security or a small pension. Well, you do the math on that. If they're making, maybe they can afford $800 a month. Well, that's becoming increasingly hard to find someplace that rents for $800 a month. And then you get into the moderate income and so forth. Moderate income would be like, we always hear the term teachers, firefighters, and so forth. Those are folks who might be making $40,000 or $50,000 a year. They are struggling to be able to buy a house anymore because of the cost of real estate. So it's a very complex problem. It takes a whole bunch of different arrows in the quiver. This is just one of them. This isn't going to solve the problem, but this solves part of the problem. And there's a bunch of other things that are going on too. Yeah, Barbara. Half to parks and land conservation. The other half, the question is, how much goes to the infrastructure needs? So it's split right down the middle. So basically a half penny continues to go to parks and nature. The other half goes to the other infrastructure needs, which are roads, affordable housing, and fire stations. That division will be done differently by each jurisdiction. So there's not one answer for Gainesville will do it one way, High Springs will do it another way, and so forth. Right. So the question is, will this handle all the infrastructure needs? The answer is no. For one thing, it doesn't deal with utilities issues, and we know those are huge in this community. It doesn't deal with a lot of other issues, but it does deal with some very serious ones, that our roads are deteriorating, and we've attempted to do this 3 times for roads in the past, and all 3 times it's been voted down. So this is an attempt to what we call a green-gray coalition, green being the parks and the nature stuff, gray being the asphalt and the built environment. And this has been done very successfully in Jacksonville 30, 40 years ago, very successful in Tallahassee, and they go by names like Vision 2020 and different things like that. But what they've done is they've gotten the builders and the Chamber of Commerce and the environmentalists all working together on something, as opposed to the way we do it in Alachua County, which is the environmentalists keep voting on our stuff and we keep winning, and the developers and the road builders keep putting their stuff up and it keeps not getting elected. So in a sense, we're trying to find that middle ground that gives something to everybody. And believe me, there's a lot of environmentalists who are not going to vote for this because it does include that other stuff. So, yeah. Correct. Right. Yeah, actually, technically what's happening is if this passes, the old wild spaces, which still has 2 years left, is repealed, and then the new one comes in at a full cent. So the net is 1 cent that runs 10 years starting in January. If this, yes, right, correct, right. That's the net effect, and yeah. So that's what. And here's what's interesting about that is people who vote no say we don't like that wild spaces stuff. Well, if they vote no, the wild spaces remains for 2 more years, and then so it's kind of a strange situation. So we don't normally repeal taxes, and it says nothing about the repeal in the language. So people don't really understand that that's what's happening. Additional questions? I said I would take any other questions now. It could be about the Green Cemetery. It could be about the land next door. It could be about developments that are going on in other parts of the community. Yes. 34th and Wilson. I have noticed that too, and it was going to be at one point a Walmart distribution center, but I don't think that's what it is now. It looks, I don't know what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Which amendment are you talking about? Yeah, what the city of Gainesville put that on the ballot because here's the problem. Oh, the question is there is something on because you're city residents, there's one more thing on the very end of the ballot, and it's a charter amendment about the city being able to fill vacancies by calling a special election. And one of the problems that the city recently experienced when a commissioner resigned is they had a very short window of opportunity to call a special election. Otherwise, the governor would appoint somebody. And it fell during the holidays, and it was just complicated. They really had to scramble because, as you know now, with overseas voting and early voting by mail and all this other stuff, you can be 6 weeks out of actual election day, and people are starting to vote. And so the window in the law was just too short. And so what this does is it fixes that, gives them a little more time to make things happen, and gives them the clear permission to do it. It's a good amendment. Any other random questions? Yeah.
About 20 years ago,
Well, the heritage trees, the lady right behind you is the old city arborist of decades, and she can answer more about it. What the I'm not familiar with the heritage trees bill. What I am familiar with is the city got very serious about planting trees and protecting the big old ones that they had. And they had a tree appeals board, and they had a lot of things that set Gainesville apart in terms of tree protection. After Meg left, one by one, many of those protections have been peeled away. And sometimes they're peeled away quietly in the dead of night. Other times it's just by neglect. And it takes a dedicated person who wakes up in the morning thinking, how are we going to save trees to save trees? And so they took her job and spread it out among half a dozen different people, and so nobody's really as responsible for it as it used to be. Gainesville's still an amazing city and a forest, and I'll just give one more little shout out to Meg. Her goal was to make it a stronger, more diverse forest, and when she took over now almost 40 years ago, the city of Gainesville was large numbers of old oak trees that were on their way out, and they were dropping branches and crushing cars. And what she did was gradually take those old trees out that were going to fall anyway and replace them with many more varieties of trees. And for instance, nobody had ever used bald cypress as a street tree, and now you see them down trees in Gainesville, and they're gorgeous, and they're strong, and they're really good street trees. And a number of other trees were reintroduced into the urban environment that turned out to be excellent choices, like bluff oaks. They really like to grow in high pH soil, like they find on the tops of sinkholes. Well, that's like road base. Turns out if you plant bluff oaks up and down roads that have a lot of lime rock on them, they do extremely well. And she learned a lot of other things and passed on that knowledge. So we're very lucky that Gainesville had that 23 years when there was somebody at the helm who wanted to make this a much stronger forest. And those trees are now, they're having babies, and so our forest is moving forward. One last question. So right next door to Oak-Hammock, to your, I'm going to call it east, was a big chunk of land that was the mirror image of the parcel that Oak-Hammock bought. It's about the same size, same family owner. This was all an old dairy farm for decades. And so when the University of Florida bought this half of it, that half remained. And my organization, Alachua Conservation Trust at the time, we were trying to buy it. And there was a for sale sign on it. And we were working hard, and we finally got what we thought was a grant program that would pay the $11 million asking price. So that's a lot of money for a little organization with 3 employees, and that sometimes couldn't make payroll. So I'm working on it, and things are looking good, and I get a call from the realtor, and the realtor says, sorry, that land just sold. And I said, what? He says, yeah, and what's weird is it sold for cash. And we didn't call you originally because we didn't think it was real, because this is from Bulgaria. And I'm like, what? And so I just hang up the phone, and I spend the rest of the day just sort of staring off in space. He calls me the next morning, and he says, okay, it only gets weirder. It just sold again for $1 million bump. So the guy who bought it in the morning for $12 million sold it in the afternoon for $13. And I mean, there was a real estate run-up going on. We knew that, but this was crazy. So I said, who is this guy? And his name was Valentin Zahariev, who's like the Bill Gates of Bulgaria. And he was getting as much money out of the country as he could while the getting was good. His specialty was, there's no members of the Bulgarian secret police in here, right? Okay. His specialty was making counterfeit steel. So if you wanted some U.S. steel or some Kobe steel from whatever, he could make the steel and stamp it with whatever stamps you needed, and good to go. And he flipped a steel mill, bought it one day, sold it the next day, and made a $400 million profit. That's just, but he was considered actually a reformer in Bulgaria. And because this was, they were coming out from under the Soviet Union and stuff. And he was such a threat to the old guard, I guess were more kleptocratic than he was, I don't know, that they firebombed his house, and they didn't hurt anybody, but the garage that had his 50 antique Mercedes all burned up. So, I know. So, anyway, I'm trying to buy the land now from this guy. And so I work a deal with the University of Florida Foundation, who I was working for at the time, and said, let's get him over here and make him an offer he can't refuse. And so what we did was we put together a deal that said that we would pay him the $13 million that he paid for it, but we would do it in a way that made it look like $18 million between some tax deals and some deferred payments that we would invest at a higher rate than he could, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And we would name a professorship in the College of Engineering after him, and a bunch of other stuff. So we put this out there, and the next thing you know, I get a call that he's in town. He wants to talk to me. I go, oh, okay. So I set up a meeting over here at the Hilton, and I'm sitting in the room waiting in a meeting room, and in walks Valentin Zahariev. He is about that wide, about that tall, but he brought with him a guy that was that wide and that tall, his bodyguard. And I made the assumption that we'd be, translating back and forth. So we got a professor who could speak Bulgarian. So he's there translating, and we're using big numbers and blah, 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 and all this sort of stuff. And at the end, he says to me in the most beautiful British English, it was very nice having this conversation with you. So he, it's just one of those things that they always do to make sure that you're not saying stuff to your compadre, because I had some other people there at the table. So anyway, when that deal didn't work out, then I proposed that he build a Bulgarian castle on the property, because he said he wanted to come to America and live here, and probably needed to come to America and live here. And so I said, well, you could build this Bulgarian castle and then put it on 5 or 10 acres. Then the rest of the other 100 acres would be a nice conservation park, and we could help, all this sort of stuff happen. Well, long story short, ACT ended up buying that property for about $3 million about 2 or 3 years ago. That guy took a $10 million write down. And so anyway, it's one of those interesting, bizarre conservation stories, and I got 1 million of them, but that was one of the crazy ones. So anyway, glad you asked that question. And with that, I'll wrap it up, but I'm happy to stick around. Thank you all very much.